Hey, welcome to or welcome back to the Average Joe Nerdcast. I'm Nate, your resident Average Joe, lover of all things nerdy, defender of nuance, and a guy who somehow keeps ending up in conversations that start with, okay, but just hear me out. This is the show where we talk games, movies, pop culture, and occasionally look at the world around us and go, yeah, that is weird. So let's unpack it. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been here for a while, then you already know how this goes. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and remember, thinking critically is not a personality flaw. So let's get into it. Okay, yes, we're doing another Control Alt Delusion. And I just want to be clear right from the top. This isn't because I woke up like, you know what would be fun today? Arguing with strangers on the internet. No one wakes up like that. I mean, not healthy people anyway. This is happening because the internet keeps doing this thing where it takes a very serious topic, strips it of all context, runs it through Facebook compression, and then hands it back to us like, here, be afraid. And lately, the word doing the most damage is grooming. I'm serious. I swear to God, I cannot scroll for more than 10 seconds without seeing it slapped on a screenshot like a warning label. A flyer, an advertisement, a bakery post, a library event, a pride parade photo where someone paused the video at the worst possible frame like it's the Zapruder film. And every single time it's the same exact energy. Red siren emojis. Please share. Protect our children. Zero explanation, zero definition, just vibes. And fucking bad ones at that. And look, before anyone gets twisted up, I'm not talking about this in the abstract. This isn't some detached internet take. I have real friends in the drag community. People I've known, people I've hung out with, people whose shows I have been to, people I've watched work their fucking asses off to be professional, intentional, and respectful about what they do. So when I see them, people I know, get painted as predators by folks who have never even met them, never talked to them, never been to a show, never even bothered to ask a follow-up question. Nah, we ain't doing that bullshit. Especially not when the accusation being thrown around is one of the heaviest words you can possibly use. Because here's the thing no one seems to want to acknowledge. Grooming is not a vibe. It's not a feeling. It's not, this made me uncomfortable. It's a very real word with a real definition used by professionals who actually deal with abuse cases. And when you water it down to mean, I didn't like what I saw on Facebook, you're not protecting kids. You're turning a serious term into a panic button. And once that shit happens, everything becomes grooming. Costumes, grooming. Rainbows, grooming. A man in makeup, grooming. Someone existing slightly outside your personal comfort zone, grooming. At that point, the word doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just a weapon. And that's where my brain short circuits, because every single person yelling, protect the kids, seems wildly uninterested in actually understanding how children get hurt in the real world. Instead, we've created this imaginary monster, this cartoon villain, this idea that danger looks flamboyant and obvious and loud and public. Which is comforting, by the way, because if danger looks obvious, then you don't have to do any real work. You don't have to have hard conversations. You don't have to look at uncomfortable truths. You can just point at the loud thing and say, that's the problem. But in reality, reality is boring and scary and complicated, and reality does not match the meme. Here's something I really want you to actually sit with for just a second. If someone genuinely wanted to harm a child, like truly, intentionally, do you think they would do it in a public space, with parents present, with flyers posted online, with the possibility of cameras being everywhere, and a comment section full of witnesses? Or would they do it quietly, privately, through trust, through access, through familiarity? Because one of those scenarios aligns with literally everything we know about abuse, and the other one is an event with folding chairs and juice boxes. But we don't want to talk about that, do we? Because that conversation is uncomfortable. That conversation forces us to admit that the real danger is usually boring looking. It doesn't wear flamboyant costumes. It doesn't announce itself. It hides in plain sight. And instead of grappling with that, we've decided to scream at drag queens on the internet. Which, by the way, is not a coincidence. It's historically consistent. Every single moral panic needs a visible other. Someone you can recognize instantly. Someone you don't have to empathize with. Drag just happens to be the current target. And I know some people listening are already bristling. I can just feel it in the force. Why are you defending this so hard? Why are you emotional about it? Because these are real people. Because words have real consequences. Because when you label an entire group of people as predators without any credible evidence, you're not just being wrong, you're being fucking reckless. And let me say this as clear as I can, because this part gets twisted all the time. Not every drag show is for kids. Not every pride event is for families. And no one serious is arguing that they should be. We already understand this concept in literally every other form of entertainment. There are R-rated movies. There are PG movies. There are comedy shows you do not bring your kids to. And there are Disney on Ice shows where nobody thinks twice. We somehow manage to navigate all of that without losing our collective minds. But the moment drag enters the conversation, all nuance evaporates. And suddenly it's all or nothing. Suddenly everything is sexual. Suddenly the mere existence of drag in public is treated like an emergency. And that's how you know this isn't really about our kids. Because if it were, the conversation would sound very, very different. It would be specific. It would be contextual. It would be about boundaries and supervision and age-appropriate content. But instead, it's just panic. Loud, angry, undirected panic. And you know what? Panic is very addictive. Panic gives people something to rally around. It gives them a villain. It gives them moral certainty without requiring understanding. You don't have to learn anything if you're already convinced that you're right. And again, and I want to stress this, I get the instinct. I really do. I'm not immune to it. Hell, no one is. When you hear kids might be in danger, your brain doesn't go, let me just review the data. It goes, stop everything. That's human. But that's also why we have to slow ourselves down, because that instinct can be hijacked. And right now, it's being hijacked hard by people who benefit from outrage, by people who gain followers, clicks, donations, or clout from keeping you afraid, by people who don't actually care what happens after the accusation lands. Because once the word grooming is out there, the damage is already done. There's no undo button. There's no correction that travels as far as the accusation. And you know what the wild part is? The people being accused are often doing everything right. Clear boundaries, clear communication, public spaces, complete transparency. which makes the entire thing even more upside down. It's like accusing a lifeguard of drowning people because you don't like swimsuits. And here's where I think we really lost the plot as a culture. We stopped distinguishing between discomfort and danger, and those are not the same thing. Something can make you uncomfortable without being harmful. Something can be unfamiliar without being threatening. Something can challenge your worldview without endangering children. But the internet doesn't reward that kind of thinking. It rewards absolutes. It rewards escalation. So instead of saying, hey, this isn't for me, people jump straight to, this should be banned. Report them. Shut it down. It goes against God. No curiosity, no nuance, no pause button. Just smash the alarm button and let God sort it out. And again, I'm not here to convince you to attend a drag show. That's not my goal. You don't have to like it. You don't have to get it. You don't have to bring your kids to anything you're not comfortable with. That's just called parenting. We all do it every single day. But what you don't get to do is redefine serious abuse terminology on the fly and aim it at people you do not understand. Because when everything is grooming, then nothing is grooming. And the people who pay the price for that are actual victims. The ones who need those words to mean something when it counts. So before I go any further, I want you to hold on to this one thought as we move into the next part of the episode. If your version of protecting children doesn't line up with how harm actually happens, if it relies entirely on optics and outrage, if it collapses the moment someone asks you to define your terms, then maybe you're not protecting kids at all. You're just participating in a panic. This episode of the Average Joe Nerdcast is brought to you by glitter. Glitter, the only substance on Earth that violates the Geneva Convention and your vacuum's warranty. Have you ever brought glitter into your home by accident? Congratulations, it lives there now, on your couch, in your carpet, in places that defy physics. You didn't own glitter, you were infected by it. Scientists say glitter has a half-life of approximately forever. And let's be clear, this isn't anti-drag rhetoric. This is anti-craft herpes. So remember, folks, if you're worried about something ruining your life long term, it's not drag, it's glitter. So now that we've established that the internet is absolutely abusing the word grooming, let's do the part nobody yelling online ever seems interested in doing. Let's talk about where abuse actually happens. Because if we're going to say protect the children, and I mean really say it, then we should probably listen to the people who spend their lives studying this shit instead of the loudest comment with the most likes. And this is the part that makes people uncomfortable, so naturally they avoid it. Most harm doesn't come from complete strangers. It doesn't come from flamboyant weirdos. It doesn't come from public events with cameras, parents, and posted schedules. It comes from people the child already knows. Family members, family friends, coaches, teachers, religious leaders, babysitters, neighbors, people with trust, and people with access. And that's not speculation. That's not an opinion. That's what decades of data say. And that reality absolutely ruins the fantasy that danger looks obvious. Because the truth is, predators don't look like villains. They look like regular fucking people. They blend in. They don't draw attention to themselves. They don't show up wearing costumes and makeup in public spaces with witnesses. They operate quietly. They isolate. They test boundaries slowly. They rely on secrecy, which is why this whole obsession with public drag events is so ass backwards it almost feels intentional. Just think about it. If you were designing the least effective environment possible for someone trying to groom a child, what would it look like? Would it look like parents present the entire time? A public venue? Staff members everywhere? Clear start and end times? Flyers posted online? Photos being taken? A room full of adults paying attention? Listen to me when I say that is not how abuse works. That is not how grooming works. That is not how literally anything works. And yet, that's the scenario people are convinced is the biggest threat to children right now. Which tells me this panic is not driven by evidence. It's driven by imagination. And imagination is dangerous when it's fueled by fear instead of facts. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Real abuse is boring looking. It doesn't come with dramatic visuals. It doesn't give you a clear villain. It doesn't let you point and say, there, that's the bad guy. It hides behind familiarity, routine, normalcy. And that's why people don't want to talk about it. Because it forces us to admit something scary. That keeping kids safe is harder than banning things we just don't like. It requires attention. It requires clear communication. It requires education. It requires uncomfortable conversations about boundaries, consent, and trust. And those conversations don't fit neatly on a Facebook post. So instead, we chase the loud thing, the visible thing, the thing that lets us feel like we did something. And man, do people love feeling like they did something. Posting, report this, feels powerful. Sharing a screenshot feels heroic. Yelling grooming feels righteous. Actually learning how abuse happens? Oh, that's work. And here's where I really start to lose patience with the panic. Because when you misuse the word grooming, you don't just hurt the people you're accusing. You actively make it harder to protect our children. You turn a specific, clinical term into background noise. So when real grooming is actually happening, the slow boundary testing, the isolation, the manipulation, it gets lost in all the static. It's the boy who cried wolf, but the wolf is trauma. And we should be furious about that. Because if you actually gave a damn about children, you'd want the word grooming to mean something precise, something actionable, something professionals can use to intervene early. Not a man wore makeup and high heels near my kid. That doesn't fucking help anyone. And let me be crystal clear about something before someone twists this shit. Acknowledging how abuse actually works does not mean accusing families or caregivers by default. It means understanding risk realistically. Because pretending danger only exists out there with strangers, outsiders, and people you don't like gives abusers inside trusted spaces cover. It lets us avoid looking inward. And history tells us over and over that moral panics love doing that shit. They redirect fear outward so nobody has to deal with the hard truths. And again, this is why drag and pride events are such easy targets. Because they're visible, they're different, they challenge norms, they make some people uncomfortable, and discomfort gets mislabeled as danger real damn quick. But discomfort is not harm, because if it were, every single awkward middle school dance would be a fucking crime scene. So we also need to talk about the way this panic completely ignores parental agency. Because the narrative acts like parents are just helpless NPCs wandering into pride events like, oh no, how did we get here? Parents choose where their children go. Parents decide what events they attend. Parents set clear boundaries every single day. And somehow, when drag enters the conversation, parents are treated like they've lost all ability to critically think, which is honestly fucking insulting. Parents navigate age appropriate content constantly: movies, music, games, social media, school events, sports. We manage to handle all of that without screaming about grooming. But throw a rainbow into the mix, and suddenly everyone forgets how choice works. And this is where I want to zoom out for a second, because this panic isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a media environment that thrives on outrage, that rewards fear, that amplifies the most extreme interpretations because they travel further. A calm post saying, "Hey, this event wasn't for me, so we skipped it," never goes viral. A post screaming, "They're coming for your children," absolutely does. And once that narrative takes hold, facts don't matter anymore. Corrections don't matter anymore. Context doesn't matter anymore. The accusation becomes the story. And the people being accused, again, real people, are left to deal with the fallout. Threats, harassment, lost jobs, canceled events, fear, all because someone decided discomfort equals danger. And look, I'm not naive. I know there are bad people everywhere, in every community, in every single profession, in every single identity group. No one is saying nothing bad has ever happened ever. But that's not the claim being made by the panic crowd. The claim is systemic, it's sweeping, it's absolute. It's drag is grooming, pride is sexualizing children, LGBTQ people are a clear and present threat. And that's where it crosses from concern into propaganda. Because once you label an entire group as dangerous, you stop seeing the individuals, you stop asking questions, and you stop caring about nuance. And historically, that road, it never ends well. What really kills me about this entire thing is how lazy it is. It is the laziest possible version of protect our children. No curiosity, no fucking research, no listening to experts, no engagement with actual prevention strategies. Just vibes and volume. Meanwhile, the real threats keep doing what they've always done: hiding in plain sight. And the resources that could be spent on education, prevention, and support, well, they get diverted into culture war bullshit. And that's not an accident. That's a feature. Because fear is profitable, and outrage is easier than responsibility. So here's where I want to land this before we move on. If your child safety strategy is entirely built on optics, on what looks scary instead of what actually causes real harm, then it's not a safety strategy. It's a comfort strategy. It makes you feel better. It makes you feel righteous. It makes you feel like you're doing something. But it doesn't actually keep kids safe. And in some cases, it makes everything so much worse. Because it teaches kids that certain people are dangerous based on how they look. It teaches them to fear difference instead of understanding boundaries. It teaches them that accusations don't need evidence. And that is a terrible fucking lesson. This episode of the Average Joe Nerdcast is brought to you by the Online Outrage Starter Kit. Are you tired of forming opinions based on research, context, or definitions? Do you long for the simpler times when all it took was one blurry screenshot and a gut feeling? Then the Online Outrage Starter Kit is for you. Each kit includes one out of context image, a word you heard once but can't define, 3 red siren emojis, and a please share caption written entirely in caps lock. No reading required, no follow-up questions allowed. Just post, panic, and wait for the dopamine hit. Online Outrage Starter Kit. Because why think when you can react? I want to talk about who actually gets hurt when this shit plays out in real life. Because it's not the imaginary kids people keep invoking. It's real people, real adults, and especially real LGBTQ kids. And this is the part that gets quietly ignored every damn time. Because while adults are busy arguing online about drag shows they've never attended, there are kids listening, watching, absorbing. Kids who are already trying to figure out who they are in a world that feels hostile enough without adults screaming about predators every damn time someone looks different. And here's the thing that should be fucking obvious, but somehow it isn't. When you label LGBTQ adults as dangerous, LGBTQ kids don't hear, oh, they just mean those specific events. They hear, people like me are dangerous. They hear people like me aren't welcome. They hear people like me are abominations. People like me should stay quiet. And that shit sticks. We talk a lot about protecting children, but we almost never talk about psychological safety, about what it does to a kid to grow up hearing their identity debated like a public hazard. And no, before anyone twists this shit, I'm not saying exposure to pride magically fixes everything. What I'm saying is belonging matters. Kids need to know there are adults who exist like them, who are okay, who are living full lives, who are not ashamed or hiding. Because shame is a fucking poison. And stigma doesn't protect children. It isolates them. And isolation is where real harm thrives. This is where the irony really kicks in. The same people yelling about grooming are actively creating environments where LGBTQ kids feel unsafe, telling anyone what they are going through. They're teaching kids, don't talk about this, don't be visible, don't ask questions, don't tell adults who might actually help you. And if you know anything about how abuse prevention actually works, you know that silence is the enemy. Kids who feel supported, talk. Kids who feel safe, speak up. Kids who feel accepted are more likely to tell someone when something is wrong. So when you create a culture where certain identities are treated as dangerous or shameful, you are not protecting kids. You're cutting off escape routes. And that's the part nobody wants to fucking grapple with. Because it forces us to admit that inclusion isn't just about being nice. It's about harm reduction. Let me circle back to the religious angle one last time because I know some folks listening are wrestling with that piece. And I want to say this carefully because it does matter. Faith in and of itself is not the problem. I know people of faith who show up for their communities, who volunteer, who feed people, who take care of the vulnerable without asking who they love first. That kind of faith, oh, I respect the hell out of that. But what we're seeing in these situations isn't faith guiding behavior. It's faith being used to justify it after the fact. It's religion as a shield. And there's a big damn difference between living your values and using your values to control other people, especially when the values being cited somehow never seem to apply inward. I don't see the same outrage campaigns over divorce rates. I don't see mass call-ins over greed. I don't see bakeries being threatened over adultery or abuse scandals. But drag? That's the hill? And at some point, we have to be honest about what's actually happening. This isn't about morality. It's just about comfort. It's about preserving a version of the world that feels familiar, even if it excludes people. Let me take a quick pause and tell you about something that actually happened locally here that kind of blows the whole mask off this entire situation. There was a small bakery here where I live, and they announced an all-ages dinner and drag event. Not a secret thing, not underground, and not hidden from the public. It was advertised publicly. Parents were welcome, kids were welcome, everybody knew exactly what it was. And what happened next? A group of very vocal conservatives decided that was not acceptable. So they didn't ask questions. They didn't show up to see what it actually was. They didn't say, hey, what does this event look like? What they did was they launched a pressure campaign. Calls to corporate, reports, public posts telling people to complain. Enough noise that eventually the business backed out and canceled the event. And then, and this is the part that really matters, they celebrated publicly. They posted online about how they did it, how the pressure worked, how the event was shut down, how the business just couldn't take it. They even bragged that the landlord had threatened to end the bakery's contract if they ever hosted a drag event again, and they called it a win. Not because a child was harmed and saved, not because something inappropriate happened, but because visibility was punished. That's not concern, that's enforcement. And while all this was happening, I saw a comment that summed up the entire mindset perfectly. Someone said the bakery needed to focus on being more inclusive, but not that inclusive. And I really want you to hear that. Be inclusive, but only on our terms. Welcome everyone, except the people that we don't like. Support this community, as long as the community doesn't include those people. That's not inclusion. That's tolerance with conditions. That's saying you can exist, sure, just not here. Not publicly, not where we can see you. And that's the quiet part being said out loud. Because if this were actually about kids, the conversation would have been very different. It would have been about boundaries, about supervision, about what the event actually involved. Instead, it went straight to punishment, straight to shut it down, straight to or else. And that's where the religious angle comes in. Because fuck, it always does. Eventually, someone brings God into it. They talk about Christian values, they talk about morality. And look, I'm not here to dunk on faith. I know plenty of religious people who are very thoughtful, compassionate, and genuinely live what they believe. But what happened here? That was not faith. This was using religion as a shield for control. Because if your version of morality leads you to threaten livelihoods, to pressure landlords, to celebrate shutting people out of public spaces, to label entire groups as predators without any evidence, that's not righteousness. That's coercion. Especially when the same belief system being invoked talks a whole lot about loving your neighbor, humility, and not bearing false witness. Accusing people of grooming without any evidence is not moral clarity. It's slander. And the thing that really sticks with me is this. They weren't satisfied with just disagreeing. They weren't satisfied with opting out. They wanted utter compliance. Don't do this again. Not here. Not in our town. Not publicly. And that right there, my friends, is the through line. This was never about protecting children. It was about deciding who gets to take up space, who gets to be visible, who gets to be welcome, and who needs to be reminded to stay quiet. And that's why this matters. Because today, it's a drag event at a bakery. And tomorrow, it's something else. That's how this always works. And I think that's why the phrase be inclusive, but not that inclusive, hit me so fucking hard. Because that's the entire philosophy right there. You can be here, just don't challenge us. You can exist, just not visibly. You're welcome, as long as we don't have to reckon with you. That's not how pluralistic communities work. That's not how freedom works. And it sure as hell isn't how you build a place where kids feel safe growing into who they are. Let me bring this back to something simple, something practical. because I don't want this episode to end with just, well, that sucks. If you are a parent listening to me right now, here's the truth. You already know how to protect your children. Hell, you do it every day. You talk to them. You pay attention. You ask questions. You notice when something feels off. You teach clear boundaries. You show them that they can always come to you. And none of that requires you to fearmonger about strangers in costumes. And if something isn't for your family, cool. Skip it. That's totally allowed. And that's totally normal. What's not normal is trying to erase it for everyone else. Because once we accept that logic, then nothing is safe from it. Today, it's drag. Tomorrow, it's books. Next week, it's teachers. After that, it's who really knows? But that's how moral panics work. They never stop at just one target. They move. And they always justify themselves the same way. It's for the kids. But here's the question I want to leave you with, and I really want you to sit with it. If the thing you're fighting against has no documented pattern of harm, no victims, no evidence, and collapses the moment someone asks you to define your terms, then what are you actually protecting? And who are you actually hurting? Because I'll tell you this much. The drag performers I know, they're not hiding. They're not isolating children. And they're not asking for secrecy. They're artists. They're community members. They're people trying to exist publicly without being demonized. And watching them get turned into villains because it's convenient, because it rallies people, because it gives someone a dopamine hit of righteousness? No, we can do better than that. We have to do better than that. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from this episode, it's this. Protecting kids requires thinking, not panicking. It requires evidence, not vibes. It requires courage, not conformity. And sometimes, it requires standing up and saying, you don't get to lie about people I know, because those people matter. And so do the kids watching us decide whether they're welcome in the world we're building. Today's episode of the Average Joe Nerdcast is brought to you by selective morality. Selective morality, the belief system where compassion is optional, context is irrelevant, and accountability is always for someone else. With selective morality, you can ignore greed, ignore abuse, ignore hypocrisy, but absolutely lose your mind over things that make you uncomfortable. Best of all, selective morality comes preloaded with one verse taken wildly out of context, a strong opinion about strangers, and zero obligation to apply your values consistently. Selective morality, available wherever irony is sold. And that's it. If you made it this far, genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I know this wasn't a light episode, and I know there are parts where I got loud. I know this wasn't nostalgia hour. This wasn't, hey, remember this game kind of energy. But sometimes the most nerd thing that you can do is care deeply about truth, language, and the people getting steamrolled by bad narratives. And I want to say this plainly before I wrap everything up. This episode wasn't about convincing you to love drag. It wasn't about forcing anyone to attend Pride. It wasn't even about changing your personal comfort level. It was just about honesty. It was about saying if we're going to use words like grooming, then we owe it to real victims to use them correctly. It was about recognizing when protect the children turns into punish the people that we just don't like. And it was about standing up for people who don't deserve to be turned into monsters because panic is easier than thinking. I have friends in the drag community. They are not abstractions. They're not talking points. They're just people. And watching them get dragged through the mud, watching businesses get threatened, watching entire communities get told, not here, not like this. That deserves to be called out. So if this episode made you a little uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is not harm. Sometimes it's just growth knocking at the door. And if you disagreed with parts of this, hey, that's okay too. I'm not asking for lockstep agreement. I'm just asking for better thinking. Because fear-based thinking doesn't protect our kids. It only protects narratives. And narratives do not bleed when they're wrong. But people do. If this episode hit for you, if it helped you articulate something you've been feeling but didn't quite have the words for, then please share it. Not to start any fights, but to slow the conversation down. And if you want to keep having conversations just like this, real ones, messy ones, the ones where we actually think things through, then please come hang out with us in the private Facebook group, Average Joe Nerdcast, The Lobby. I'll post the link in the show notes. Or head right over to Facebook and in the search bar, just type in Average Joe Nerdcast, The Lobby, and you will find the page. I promise it's not a debate pit. It's not a rage farm. It's just a bunch of nerds trying to make sense of the world without losing our humanity. And we have a whole lot of fun and play a lot of games throughout the week just to pass the time. So as always, shout out to my player 2. And shout out to everyone behind the scenes. You know who you are. And shout out to each and every one of you. Until next time, stay gold, nerd bold, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Game over.
Also, and I'm just throwing this out there, if someone in 6-inch heels with a full face of makeup on, hitting choreography, is making you feel personally threatened, that might just be a you problem. I mean, some of the loudest critics can't even survive a Target run in uncomfortable shoes. With your weak-ass ankles. Devastatingly weak. I mean, seriously, if I could do a flawless beat, dance for 90 minutes, and not die in heels, I'd be mad too.